Hey everybody, happy Thursday. Hope you guys are having a great Thursday. Another day in quarantine. I think we're on day like 30 some odd. I lost count. I think I do this show basically to tell you guys and say happy what day it is, so I know what day it is. But happy Thursday. Interesting things going on in the news today as we hop into the day. I was laughing. Before we came on air, I saw the report that the small business stimulus that has been out for, I believe, like 2 weeks, is already depleted. Secretary of Treasury Munchin says the $1,200 is enough cash to get by for 10 weeks. So basically, that's the equivalent of making about $6,200 a year. Meanwhile, our poverty guidelines just for 2020 say that poverty actually is $12,760 annually. It could be just me, but these stimulus checks might not be enough for America. And unfortunately, we've seen the games going on still this week with nothing to help our small businesses that are out there. I mean, it's amazing that they blew through all this money. It went out so fast. The qualifications seem to be able, you could fog a mirror. I hope the small business owners that truly need it were able to get it. I do know on the first days, it was incredibly difficult. I heard so many small business owners complaining, especially about Bank of America, on how they were like, oh, if you didn't have a loan, we're not going to give this to you. And then it was fixed, but it's just very frustrating. The banks didn't have a process in place, and they were the ones getting paid. In the news this morning, we knew it was coming. I don't know why the news media is always like, oh my God. But 5.2 million Americans filed for unemployment last week. That brings us up to corona-related shutdown numbers at 22 million. So it's just a shock to the entire U.S. labor market. We're hoping that we can get back to work. I did see right when on air, the CDC did release a report stating that there are 20 states that they believe are ready to open on May 1st. But then again, it just leads me to this question. What is the standards? Like, who's making the calls on where we're going back and when we're going back? It's very confusing. I do hear you guys out there when people message me and ask me, Eric, I mean, you talk to the media, what are they telling you? And I can tell you, they tell me the same thing they tell you. Nobody really has an idea. It's a bunch of people who all have whatever motives they may have. I've even heard this one thrown out there today that Pennsylvania may be the last state to come back up from lockdown because it's such a critical swing state in the election. I'm like, what about all those people? Speaking of Pennsylvania, they did make the news their Senate, which is funny, their state Senate, which reminds me of those jokes from The Office. The state Senate did approve a bill overnight for their governor, Tom Wolf, stay-at-home order to overthrow it and basically want to send people back to work, take away the forced stay-in-home orders. But they do believe that the governor actually vetoed that. He came out with a large statement about 2 hours ago stating that this comes down to health and safety. He will use his veto power on this. And it just leads us to this question again, like we're now seeing it in the streets of Michigan. We're seeing it throughout the country. People are starting to roll. We're sick of being in our homes, sick of not getting a straight story. And that brings me to today's show. The folks that we do coming on, a lot of the guests cover a lot of what I just led with. Now, I do want to talk a little NBA because we have some time here in sports, right? We all miss sports. Tomorrow I'll dive deeper, but as we know, over this weekend on Saturday, the much anticipated Michael Jordan documentary from ESPN Sports will be on. It's a 10-episode series. And Michael Jordan said yesterday he hopes that you still like him after you watch it. Guys, and I don't think there's any question that we understand that probably playing with a great like Michael Jordan, or in the way that we've seen Tom Brady can be a bit rough with his teammates, Wayne Gretzky, the great LeBron, this isn't an easy game. Even the late Kobe Bryant, we've all heard about the Mamba mentality. But you don't look less on somebody. He's still the GOAT of basketball. So he demanded out of his teammates. He wanted to be a winner. when you're getting paid that kind of money, you're not just showing up at the office. I know that that's a belief that people want you to go like, oh yeah, totally. But no, these athletes are very intelligent. They have the GOATs, the greatest of all times. They do want to win, and they will do anything, and they will. We all have that even in your day-to-day work. You're a good worker, but you have that one guy. I know in the military, we have those guys that you don't even know why the hell they enlisted. You're like, dude, why are you even here? So good for Jordan for coming out and saying that. I think it's just hilarious that people are coming out and saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to like Jordan. I was reading this thread, and people got lost in it, of course, were telling me how great LeBron James was over Jordan. 2 different times, 2 great basketball players. One's got a hell of a lot more rings than the other, and played for the same team for a longer amount of time. But good for LeBron. He says he's staying in LA, and he's done a lot for the community. So not hating on you, LeBron. You are a damn good basketball player. And finally, as we go into bringing on our first guest, the NBA is having a Board of Governors meeting this Friday. And the sources say that they're going to take place digitally, of course. And what they're going to be talking about is how to get the season started. The rumor mill is swirling in the NBA, talking about starting in June, getting back into training, July, start the season, and finish the NBA Finals in October. Which, if you are like me, I think it's actually a decent idea. I felt that the NBA season shouldn't start in late October. It should actually start in late December as the NFL football season is dying down. We only have those college bowl games to deal with. And come on, most of the ones that are in December, folks, let's just be honest with each other. Who is really watching some of those bowl games besides the people who have students on the teams or alumni? Not most of us are watching those games on Saturday on June 15th, right? Or December 15th. Nobody's like, hey, I can't wait to watch the Alamo Car and Amazon Bowl. Nobody cares. So I think it's good for the NBA to come up with this plan. I know that they really want to, and the rumors out of Major League Baseball is they're really trying to this plan out of Arizona. So, I hope to have sports back. It is good to see these organizations start to come back. Yesterday, the president of the United States did have a meeting with several of the commissioners again, including Mark Cuban, who, in case you don't know who Mark Cuban is, he's the guy who's on your TV every day for the last 6 weeks. So that's who Mark Cuban is. But anyways, now it's time to get to the point. Our first guest is a good friend of mine. If you haven't seen him on Fox Business, I don't know where you've been. He's all over the place, contributor for The Hill and many other outlets. He's been a great mentor to me, and actually, one of our guests today actually introduced me to this guest, and we became friends. But our guest today is none other than Oz Sultan. So let's welcome Oz to our show. Oz,
hey, how are you?
I caught him. I'm good. How are you doing, bud?
Not too bad. How are things over there?
Another day, another dollar, living the life of living on the West Coast. We're just trying to figure it out. I know you're in New York, right?
I'm in Harlem, and oddly, I'm in one of the few zip codes that has under, as of right now, has under 400 cases.
Oh, wow.
But you consider our
So,
population density, that's
yeah.
significant.
So let's ask you, and we'll jump into this because you are in a unique location.
Mhm.
Let's talk about New York and everything we're seeing on TV as it's bad
It's
and
horrible.
it's horrible. Is it like we're seeing, because you have seen these other people that are on there with their cameras filming emergency rooms, like there's not a line out here, like they're around looking for dead bodies. Kind of tell people what it's like in New York. I know a lot of our viewers are West Coast, obviously. So kind of tell us what you've seen in New York.
Well, we've got a couple challenges. I mean, I'm working on a piece right now. I was talking to a couple of funeral directors who actually won't even go on the record because they're afraid of the ramifications from the state. But Cuomo was supposed to authorize funeral directors whose licenses had lapsed to kind of come in and help out. That hasn't happened. And so right now we've got a 14-day, actually, no, sorry, we've got a 3-week backlog on bodies for cremation. Bodies that were sitting in refrigerated trucks and are still sitting in refrigerated trucks are being transported upstate for cremation. There's a college that has a funeral school that's between here and Plattsburgh. And at the same point in time, Hart Island, which has been used for epidemics over the course of the past, 150 years, now has mass graves that they're calling temporary mass graves, where the bodies are being stacked three high. The challenge, I think, is that both De Blasio and Cuomo have said that you're going to be able to recover your dead if you want that later to have them interred somewhere else. But there's a number of concerns about that. We had the first case of COVID contracted from a dead body the other day. We have over 10,000 dead, and the number is climbing. We have long waits at emergency rooms. And the bigger problem that we have now, and this is part and parcel a administration issue with Cuomo and De Blasio and also the hospitals, is if you don't have a fever of 101, they're sending you home. And the number of folks that have died at home and not been found has increased about 400%. So, we've got some long-term systemic problems that we're going to have here in New York City. Also, the utilization of ventilators and the allocations by the governor has been relatively problematic. And, de Blasio saying go out and party right before quarantine. Cuomo finally putting a perspective in place that says, hey, wear a mask if you go outside, only yesterday doesn't really necessarily help the situation that we have. And at the same point in time, we had a lot of hipster New Yorkers out in Brooklyn, well, non-hipsters here in Harlem, but folks sitting in parks all the way up until about a couple of days ago. And every single time you've seen these things happen, you've seen contagion clusters. So, from a security perspective, I think that's a big concern. From the perspective of where are we as a city, we've got the military rolled out. Javits Center, which I'm not sure if you've ever been to, has been turned into a field hospital. So you've got, maybe about 5 million square feet turned into a field
Are
hospital.
people there? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I've heard that there's nobody there.
There's a fair amount of people there, but remember that's overflow. That and the USS Comfort were sent here as overflow. And so one of the challenges that you have is once people get into a certain hospital process, there isn't, this is all processes. You were in the military, you understand this stuff, chain of command. But at the same point in time, what's the process for taking overflow from hospitals and routing them to the Comfort and routing them to Javits? That's something that de Blasio is responsible for, and he really hasn't done much.
Yeah, that is very true. I have seen De Blasio kind of sit there. The unreported police sick calls. I've seen that the forces have been deplenished. I mean, at sometimes
We
if
have over
there's
2,000 police officers sick.
yeah, just it's
Inside
crazy,
of a police
right? I
force
mean,
of 50,000, we have hundreds of firefighters sick. And then that's not including the addition, we've got MTA police, we've got path police, we've got police that work the tunnels. We also have port police out there, and all of these people are affected.
so let me ask you this, Oz. Obviously, your background being in security and living in what probably one of the hot spots for everything.
Yep.
It's terrorist wet dream is the city of New York. Movies have portrayed it. I always hate seeing the city of New York targeted. I get it. But I mean, this makes you guys really. I don't ever want to call anything in New York weak. I love the state of New York and the first responders and folks like you doing a job. But is it politics in a way when human lives are being done? Everybody's praising Cuomo and de Blasio when really, if you peek behind the mirror, it's not really being. I don't think they've done a bang bang job. I think there's a lot of panic to a city that doesn't do that. And for me, it's personal. I have obviously friends like you, and I have it really personal. My youngest brother lives in Soho, so
Yeah.
to be pinned up in house, not getting true numbers. And I guess this my question is. Are you concerned because we can never get an honest number of what really is going on? The death count just yesterday, and you brought it up, this was triggered the question. The death count just yesterday in New York was upped by 3,000 as of, oops, we just marked these folks also had corona.
Anyone who's dying during this period is being marked as a COVID death. That's what the de Blasio administration is doing. And that creates a tremendous amount of problems because, look, there was Jimmy who ran Trash and Vaudeville, who's like kind of this punk icon that died of cancer a couple days ago, and his death is going to be lumped in with all of these numbers. And I mean, it's from the music scene to all these other scenes inside of New York. Anyone who's just dying of natural causes is being lumped in. And the questions are, what are they doing in terms of handling these bodies? The state of Pennsylvania, for example, you have to put a crypt down into the ground before you put the casket into the grave. And inside of some of the graves that we have here, I don't know if there's necessarily standards that are being adhered to. I also don't know if there's enough crypt. They're running out of everything. We had two crematoriums catch fire, and we've got crematoriums running 24 hours a day right now because they ran out of body bags and had to put people in FEMA bags. Well, the FEMA bags burn hotter. And they're telling people don't put the bodies in the FEMA bags, but once they're in the FEMA bags, they're not, disinterring them from the FEMA bags to put them in a body bag that they don't have. They just have to be burned. So you've got huge issues with this. I think we also have issues from the perspective of mourning and the perspective of how do people really deal with the issue that their dead are dead, that their loved ones are gone, that they need an appropriate way to mourn. From my community to other communities. I mean, the last actual funeral I went of someone who died was Ruby Wright, who was our one of our esteemed RNC district leaders, who passed away at 99 prior to Corona. And that was about a month and a half ago. And the challenges that we're having right now is that you have to move these things to virtual or Zoom memorials, virtual or Zoom funerals, because the actual interment of bodies, if you can inter them, isn't necessarily happening. And also, you're running through this process. If you didn't know that someone that you love died, you've got 14 days to claim them. Otherwise, they end up in a mass grave, or 80% of the bodies are just being cremated, and you may not have any idea. And that's a huge problem. And then I just want to touch on one last thing. When you were so the terrorist issue, so the soft target issue, this is an issue that's been of concern for a long period of time, and we've had multiple truck attacks by folks here in New York City, some by ISIS-related terrorists, some by just really kind of crazed people, and some by fanatics that are not associated with any kind of Islamist terrorist ideal. We've had some white nationalists mixed in there too. That's a big concern. Right now, like we have cars running through New York at high speeds because there's nothing out there, and getting stuck on, the concrete center medians and things like that. I think as we come back to normalcy, and I think as you look at what the terrorist groups have stipulated, this is ISIS, Boko Haram, and a few others internationally, that the soft target issue is going to continue to be an issue in New York City. And then as we start looking internationally, things really haven't stopped. Just because Corona has stopped the world for turning here doesn't mean that the world has stopped turning elsewhere. And the hotspots that were hotspots have continue to flare up.
That's great that you bring that up, because I was just going to say, the one thing that has popped up, not just the Russians playing with our military, to our two militaries just love to do flybys on each other. It's it's always entertaining. I don't ever make a big deal about it.
With the boats.
That just happened yesterday. That's where I was going, and that's a question for you, right? And I know you're a guy that could do this. Your background, especially working with the administration before it became the administration. That day in November that so many people have still cried since 2016 about, and our media still reminds us about every day. What is the story with Iran? I mean, did you ever believe that you would live in a country where our Congress and our Senate would support measures to take away the president's power to protect us against terrorists and groups that have been on our hate list for many, many years? This isn't new with Iran. Iran has a target for us for years. And the fact that I feel that we're toothless versus them going up like 6 of our naval vessels, we should have sunk those dudes and put them at the bottom of the sea. That's how it used to be back with the Reagans and the Bushes of the days. And now we've become this soft, let's hug it out kind of group that I just don't understand. What's your thoughts on why we're going to this more toothless version of our military?
Well, I think one, we've struck a dissonance in between compassion and common sense. Okay. And I think where common sense should prevail, many times they're looking at it from a compassionate perspective. We have a new generation of Democrats that have a very different perspective on what military force should be used and when it should be released. And this is just from the Obama administration to now. And a lot of this, I think, is oftentimes directed at President Trump and this administration more out of a sense of anger that they're not in control than, the actual sensibility of like, well, what should we be doing that, solves problems. Um, with the Iranian boats, I think if they had gotten any closer, they would have they would have been fired on. Because if you think back a couple of years, we had the one issue of a American cruiser being rammed in it was the Gulf or the Red Sea, I can't remember. But taking, I think, a delicate position or in a bit of restraint isn't necessarily a bad thing right now. Because on the flip side of this, you also have to consider what the ramifications of military action could be inside of Congress. Congress is very set on taking a compassionate perspective to open up some of the sanctions on Iran. Why? Because Iran's mismanagement of their entire COVID scenario has led to them becoming a tinderbox for COVID inside of the Middle East. And what that's led to is Saudi Arabia tightening up their borders with Iraq to the north, Saudi Arabia shutting down Hajj, which has never happened in 1441 years. And at the same point in time, Iran not doing the same thing. The Shia religious ceremonies that probably should have been halted at the same time were not. And what that has led to is the proliferation of coronavirus in Iran. At the same point in time, when you listen to what the ayatollahs and the mullahs are saying over there, oftentimes more than not, they're blaming the West, they're blaming everyone else, and they're blaming a lack of access to medicine and a few other things. Now, I can understand perhaps allowing a loosening of the medical embargo upon them, or doing something that's more like the oil for cash trades that we had during the Reagan administration. But I think that some of the perspectives that Democrats have taken, which is just loosen, the restraints on a country that has consistently, since the 1980s, proven that they are intent on expressing their hegemony. This is Shia hegemony on Sunni Muslim countries that have absolutely no interest on that through military aims. We have to be real careful with this stuff. And at the same point in time, think about the terrorist moves that have happened from the Iranians. Soleimani was killed in Iraq. What was Soleimani doing in Iraq? And at the same point in time, you've had Iranian irregulars and Iranian-supported insurgent troops in Iraq, in Syria, fighting the YPG, fighting the Peshmerga, and also fighting the SDF in southern Syria. Uh, this complicates the situation, and I think when you talk to a lot of folks on the Democratic side of the aisle, the question has to be raised: how much of foreign policy are you really considering inside of your compassionate view of this? Because sure, help the Iranian people. Everyone wants to help everyone's people. I don't think there's a single person who watches this show and thinks that we shouldn't have a degree of compassion to others, regardless of faith or regardless of creed. But at the same point in time, I think we need to be reasonably sensible when it comes to looking at established policy and what problems we've had with this country and how we actually can solve this in a way that's meaningful. And because of that impasse inside of Congress, because of a lack of viewing America from a national security perspective, and because of a lack of them wanting to understand some of the new technologies and new challenges that are also raised, because we haven't talked about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin, but I'll tell you this: Bitcoins go for 5 times market rate in Iran because it functions as almost a black market currency that they can pass through hard wallets. All of these things, and an education is really what Congress needs if they're going to be making decisions that actually protect America, and also at the same time, help our allies and some of our enemies that are in dire straits.
Absolutely. I mean, that was great. That was the best take. It's better than any take I could have given. So I like that. I mean, let me ask you as we wrap up here. And if you think I was going to let you off the hook without this question, it's the number one question that I see. Obviously, one of our guests today is Josh Philipp, who did that great documentary at Epoch Times on our friends in China. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, What's your thoughts on China? With reports coming out, I love Josh did this release like 3 weeks ago. And today our friends at Bigger Networks, to be more focused on putting Mark Cuban on all the time, announced that they believe maybe now that China might have put this out of a lab and wasn't from some weirdo eating a bat. It's now looking like it's lab related. That would be an act of terrorism if you, I mean, how does this just accidentally leave a lab and make the spread? I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that I'm not one to get on the, InfoWars bandwagon, but this one has a lot of legs when I watch this documentary, and now I'm seeing further intelligence come out that it's kind of interesting that Wuhan is the village and all of that is right next to 2 testing laboratories. Just
two level 5 biowarfare facilities. Okay, let's be real specific about what these things are. Level 1 or level 5, depending which scale you're using, but it's the top level. So my friend Alex Lightman has documented this extensively on his Facebook wall, and if you care to go and poke around, that's there. There was a scientist named Sheng Li who apparently had been the recipient of a couple of grants and was involved in medical research around the bioweaponization of SARS and now what has become COVID. If you look at the COVID virus, it honestly looks like SARS that has a portion of the AIDS virus spliced in it. And if you look at how COVID works, it attacks the body, attacking T cells, very much like the AIDS virus. So I'm not going to draw any conclusions here, which is I think what a lot of people are doing, but I'm going to present a couple different pieces of information that I've heard. Obviously, you can do your own diligence on this and come to your own conclusions, which is what I strongly advise every American to do. But the challenges here are just, let's go through the timeline. 1, China found out about this in November. 2, China did nothing about this for roughly about 6 days, meaning it allowed it to proliferate. 3, the actions that China took didn't really move into shutdown until sometime in January and February, and that was only partial. 4, the residents of Wuhan, in many cases, were welded into their buildings, and some of them got food drops, some of them didn't. So there's a big question about who died, how many people died, and what numbers are accurate. The SO4, the sulfur, basically the sulfur emissions that have been coming and have been tracked by satellite from Wuhan are indicative of a larger number of dead than what China is reporting. And it's also a little bit suspect that, you can go from having a large number of increases in cases to 0 in 1 day. They have put in place, and I've shared a couple of these articles, but they've put in place guidelines that anyone that goes publicly and starts talking about, the COVID and the origins of COVID could be shot. They've also put guidelines in place that are restricting the amount of research that can be done into where COVID came from. And they're terrified right now that the Japanese government has said that they are going to pay Japanese companies to pull their entire supply chains out of China. Okay, all China cares about inside of this really seems to be, at the end of the day, money, not people, not people's safety, not people's security, and not the Chinese people, which are their own people. And the ramifications to come, I think, are threefold that no one's really talked about. One is that there could be a ton of lawsuits that come from the United States government and other countries, most likely Italy and the United Kingdom, because most of the infections we've had in New York came from Italy and the United Kingdom outside of Chinese flights coming here. But those lawsuits could be in the trillions of dollars. And while those could take years to proceed, those will be adjudicated, and those are going to have impacts on China. 2, the supply chains. 96% of supply chains in America have been disrupted. And most American companies, Apple has already indicated that they're pulling their supply chains out of China. They're relocating to Vietnam and potentially India. There's a Foxconn facility that's supposed to go in, I believe, in Montana. So there's some additional opportunities there, and there's some opportunities for the president to definitely put some executive orders forward that are operating, economic stimulus to allow companies to come back home and increase that manufacturing here. But that's a big thing to consider. Because the continued disruption of those and the continued lack of confidence inside of China are going to lead to problems. And the third, and this is the big one, remember those trade negotiations that we were in the middle of in December? Yeah, those haven't been agitated yet. And that's, I think, the Trump card in Trump's back pocket. Because as all of this comes down and as we have to work with the Chinese because they're the biggest suppliers of PPE right now. I mean, I'm involved in the supply chain. And also, if any of your viewers have a need you need KN95 masks, PPE, ventilators, we have access. Tweet me, Oz Sultan. But all of that stuff's Chinese or Turkish, and there's a little bit coming from the Indian supply chain. The ramp up of the American supply chain is slowly happening, but we've got price gouging measures that are coming in place with, FEMA not just seizing inventory, but arresting people for selling masks that should be sold at somewhere around $4 or $5 for $6 to $9 a mask. So it's a strange state of affairs. But what I will say is that the Chinese government's going to have a lot to answer for inside of the next 10 months. And as we see unemployment funds run out, and as we see, you started talking about Mnuchin, as we see the need for the United States government to most likely pump an additional $6 to $10 trillion worth of economic stimulus to get us through this. Because look, we've eaten up $2 trillion in economic stimulus already. We've got another 2.3 trillion in economic lending that's coming in, but that has to be fully deployed by the Fed. So we're probably going to need this to happen over and over again over the course of the next couple of months. And what we're seeing is that 350 billion in small business loans gets us 3 weeks. So all of this will be, at the end of the day, accruable back to China in some degree.
Wow, that was the best answer I've ever been given to a question. Most thorough, man. It's like you know what you're talking about. You do have the background. I hate to end this interview, but we are going to bring you back. I'd love to have you on regularly to get our viewers going. I know that there's some questions in there, so if you have time, you want to go back through. But tell the folks before we jump what's the easiest way to get a hold of you if they want to message you and find out more about what you're doing.
Easiest way to get a hold of me is on Twitter at Oz Sultan. If you have PPE requirements and minimum orders we're touching are 500,000. Just simply because the small orders are real difficult to fulfill. I really can't route anyone. But if you have an order for 500,000 or more, or at least 25 ventilators, Oz at Sultan Inc. SULTANINC.com. And I'm on Telegram. I'm on all the social media channels, and I'll be speaking at the virtual blockchain conference in about a week.
Awesome. That is outstanding, my friend. Thank you again for coming on. Make sure you stay safe there in NYC, and let me know if there's anything we could do to support your efforts there on the ground. Thanks again, bud.
Eric, thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, brother. So, I feel like I needed my pen out. I mean, I don't even know where my pen went. I had a pen. Okay, I found it. Look, I did. I was taking notes. You should be proud of me. If you watch Liquid Lunch with my good buddy John Tabasco running it, he holds a Trump pin. Well, I wouldn't be Marini if I didn't hold a 50 cal pin. So I love these pins. I actually go to Bottle Breacher. I got this one years ago. It's actually my favorite. I actually use it now because I wanted to travel with it, but TSA, they really frown on these beautiful things. I tell them it's made by a Navy SEAL, but that still doesn't give you very much kudos. They're just like, sir, it looks like a bullet. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? Throw it quickly at someone? Trust me, I'm in my 40s. I'm not throwing anything quick. But I do to bring a buddy of mine on, and our next guest, he has been an intricate part of Life Flip Media since its infancy. If we were even infants, I think we were newborns when Derek started personally advising me on ideas. He is the brains that created the great veteran organization called Bunker Labs. He helped their huge growth in what it is today. That's what he started with. He's since moved on and is the co-founder and CEO of an amazing organization. And in fact, he is agreed to join us today, I believe, all the way from from, hold on, Derek, my friend, where exactly in the world are you today?
I'm in Moscow. Where are you, Eric?
Moscow. Everybody, all of a sudden, people are like, oh, he's one of those guys. I'm here in beautiful Beaverton, Oregon, or just outside of Portland. So thanks for joining me, bud. Let's start off with the number one question. You're in Moscow. How is everything there in Moscow? Obviously, we don't get a lot of news on that. I know there are goods that find out, but what's it like in Moscow right now with COVID-19?
Well, Moscow is like the rest of the world. They're very concerned about the virus. They have isolation measures in place that most people are following, and some are not, but the majority of people are. And it's just a scary time, and my heart goes out to everyone in Moscow, but really everyone across the world, and especially you, my friend.
Oh, I'm fine. We're safer than our friends in New York. I wish I could be in New York, honestly, with my youngest brother, sitting there right now, and just want to put my arms around him, and we can't. It's very frustrating. We're good friends. Oz. Of course, Mr. Sultan. I love calling him Mr. Sultan. It just sounds so funny. He's the man.
Yeah.
But our guys, friends on the ground there in New York, it's just scary. Then our fellow, brothers and sisters in arms stepped up that are there, the National Guard. I've seen a lot of the cheap shots on the National Guard because I gotta love people like the National Guard there. I'm like, we don't just find bags in the National Guard. There's a lot of other parts. I don't know why everybody thinks it's either disaster relief or attacking people. There's other jobs in the process that we all have. I mean, it's not just kill or fix things. So
well, and I just think I moved to New York City right after 9/11 in 2001, and one thing that I saw then and I see now is the resilience of that city. And it's obviously horrific what is happening, but if it was going to happen to any one city in America, I am glad that it's happening to New York, because New Yorkers are resilient. They're going to stand together and they're going to get through this, because not one person or one organization can solve this problem, but I believe that a united New York will help them get through it. And I'm seeing that not just with the National Guard, but all the frontline workers there. So it's exciting. It's sad to see, but at the same point, it's bittersweet, because it's great to see people working together. Guys like Oz, using his free time to get ventilators, and other people that are just doing great, honorable things. So.
That's true. You bring up a great point about all the great volunteers. I was not part of, but I watched over the weekend. We're going to have the organizer on next Thursday, but they did this first responders like laugh-in, and it was great. It was all Zoom, and it was these comedians, but they're all mostly New York based. So I was just geeking out because I think New York comics are funny, right? You think of Billy Crystal and all of the greats that have come through, and it was great to see it, but they had raised something like $12,000 to donate masks to first responders. I know Oz and I touched on it a little earlier about how pressed the NYPD and NYFD are actually getting right now with, they're running out of these simple supplies, and it's all controlled by our friends in China. But that's not why I brought you on. I'm sure people are asking themselves, what is this guy doing in Moscow? It seems to be the country that before, now, I have a tech background, so I think I know tech is everywhere. I know our friends in Israel have amazing technology. It's, to me, better than the Silicon Valley there. Yep, I fired that shot just now. I definitely think Israel is the place to be when it comes to technology. But Moscow was always on my radar just from being in tech. Kind of tell us what you're doing there and what you've developed. You're kicking it. You're really killing it right now. So I want to get your feedback on what you're doing there, and kind of go from there.
Well, I started GSD Venture Studios with my co-founder Gary Fowler, and the thesis of GSD is that intellectual capacity is evenly spread throughout the world, but opportunity is not. And everyone that works in venture, whether it be Andreessen Horowitz or your best startup in Silicon Valley, is really doing the same thing. And they're looking for the best talent in the world to deliver the best products. And what we do at GSD Venture Studios is we travel the world looking for bold, resilient entrepreneurs. And we're not scared to go to places where some others are not. And right now I'm in Russia. We have worked with some amazing entrepreneurs in Russia, But it's not just about Russia. It's about all of Eastern Europe, Israel, really just looking for that top talent, specifically around creating artificial intelligence companies.
Hold on. All this fancy technology. I'm a one-man show today, so you got to bear with me. I don't have the fancy producers yet. So what are some of the companies that you're developing? I love following you on social to see everybody. It's great to see it because, growing up in a SaaS world after getting out of the military, for me, remembering what the Silicon Valley was like back in the day when everybody wanted to be on Sand Hill Road, right? I mean, that's the place to be. I mean, there's been famous episodes of, shows filmed on there, and now you're kind of seeing this spread out. So are you getting that vibe? I mean, that's the vibe I get from watching you over the last 2 years. Moscow in Russia looks like it's the new Silicon Valley. Like they're really jumping into what as kids we would have thought is like, oh my God, like the Ruskies would like what we're doing. Like how that would be, being a Cold War kid. Now you're not seeing that. Technology kind of takes away the stigma that's built up from all of our movies from the 80s.
So, I don't think we need to decide is Russia or Moscow another Silicon Valley. I know there was an article out recently in the Wall Street Journal that Minsk is the Silicon Valley of Eastern Europe. I think Russia is always going to be Russia. And what I mean by that is there's going to be unbelievable engineer talent, specifically around algorithmic math, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And we see a big opportunity in this part of the world because of that. And not only is there top talent, I think what's relevant in a post-COVID world is it's at a much lower cost than your $350,000 engineer from Facebook. And so there's this opportunity where you can combine top talent and at a low cost that is going to become a bigger and bigger issue as we come into this post-COVID economy.
So let me ask you, as we do come into this, we're starting to lift some of the restrictions. The states are starting to, start use some common sense, and we can get back to work. Not everybody is. The CDC did release 2 hours ago 20 states that they believe are ready to go on May 1st. So that's outstanding. I read reports. Starbucks told their employees today that they're figuring ways to start. So it's good to see those businesses going. So that leads back to China, right? At the end of the day, it's the elephant in the room that everybody knows about. And I don't know why we're treating it as shocking, but do you see Russia jumping into those others that could be an outlet for us to be trade partners with, to take away the business from China? Because it's very alarming when you even think from a pharmaceutical level that two countries control 98% of all the pharmaceutical drugs coming into the United States alone. And I know that's for other first world countries like Russia. I mean, Putin is an amazing leader for that country, no matter what people here in the States think. Vladimir Putin has done a great job for Russia. He's a great trading partner. Do you think Russia can become that trading partner and take that weight so we don't have to give so much dependence on China?
What's interesting, for the last 6, 7, maybe 8 months, when the trade war started, so even pre-COVID, people had been reaching out to me from the United States on how they could work in Russia and not work with China. So I do see a lot of traction with that idea, Eric. I think in practice, it will take a lot of courage and execution. And I think people with the right contacts. I think Russia is no different than any other country, that you really need to connect with the right people and know the right people. And I do see that as something that can happen. And I'm very optimistic and long. I think that the entrepreneurs, whether you're in Russia, the United States, or China for that matter, are politically agnostic. They want to create products. They want to create business opportunities around the world. And that's no different in Russia, just like Silicon Valley, China, or Japan.
On a smart ass note, every time someone says China, I want to say China, just because it's how it's said. every press conference. It's just a bad habit I picked up.
It's kind of like when all the press used to call Iraq.
Yeah, Iraq. Yeah, they do this. Hey, they screw up the word Oregon too. Don't worry, they're not alone there. So my last question before we jump to our next guest. So in my, just because you're there, and I'm sure people want to know, we've got a nice little viewership here. You know, what's the vibe on the ground when everybody kind of looks at the States from, from a Moscow level? I mean, are they looking at us as like we have our you-know-what together, or are they looking at us like, Jesus, these guys are a mess? I mean, obviously every country has theirs, but we always have looked, ever since I've been born, I just remember we kind of always, hey, what does Russia look like compared to us, right? I mean, even Apple went as far as to do that TV series, which was, what if the Russians beat us to the moon and did our Apollo where we failed? So, that comparison's there. So, I mean, are they impressed with what we're doing, or is it not really talked about?
Well, I'll leave the political commentary to you, Eric. I talk to entrepreneurs that are apolitical, and I think they are impressed with the United States when it comes to the systems that we have in place to grow startups, to scale technologies across the world. They understand that Silicon Valley is not about America, but it's about a port to the rest of the world. And that's really what we're trying to do at GSD. And those are really the discussions that I have, is how do we grow products? How do we build things that people want, not what we can do? And, how do we use Silicon Valley as that port? And so from that perspective, they're very impressed and very excited about bringing their products to the United States.
Outstanding. That's great to know. I mean, I promise I wasn't trying to be political. That's my next guest. We're gonna dive into all the taboo topics right after. His video with just 1.5 million views on our friends in China. We're gonna get all deep diving into that.
I'm between the guy with 1.5 million views. That's where you stuck me, between Oz.
You're between Oz and Josh. I mean, they're pretty good guys to be stuck between. I mean, for sure, if I got in the room with the three of you, I would officially be the dumbest guy in the room. But then I would be passing my own motto to make sure that I'm never the smartest guy in the room. But being a Marine, I know I'll give you this question. We have just a couple minutes. I'll leave it with this. Here in the States, and this is more of a veteran and kind of VC question. I just want to throw it out to you. Mark Cuban has been on the TV every day. What he has to do with COVID-19, I absolutely have zero idea. What he has to do with sports, he leads one team and that's it. But he's been on TV every day, and now we're seeing him at the same time. This guy's on TV, but we both know how he's treated his own venture-backed businesses. You think that is he somebody that the country should be leaning on? If you were looking for someone to get advice from, would Mark Cuban be your guy when it comes to leading an economy back and strong? From a business standpoint, not politically. I don't care if he thinks he's going to run with like 4 months to go, which is unbelievable. But what do you think about Mark Cuban? Do you think he's a guy to lead the pace?
Well, I'll tell you what I do think that private enterprises should be leading the pace. And I don't know if Mark Cuban is the exact right guy, but I'll tell you what, it's not the bureaucrats that work at the DMV or the IRS. And to involve people that have worked in some capacity, I think is great. I would encourage, other leaders from business to get involved, guys like the Bezos and, the Zuckerbergs, the guys at GE and GM that have the scale to actually help, and perhaps a little bit more practical experience. But I think it's a lot better than just government bureaucrats that don't have experience operating in startups and business.
Awesome. Well, Derek, I thank you so much for joining us. What is it, nighttime? Was it lit like the middle of the night where you're at?
It's 9:45. It's not.
Oh, it's not late. I don't even feel bad. Then we're going to have you back on regularly then, because it's not even late.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to be on.
So perfect. Thank you again for coming on, bud. I appreciate you greatly. Stay safe, and we'll chat very soon. Thank you again, everybody. Derek Distenfield. And how can people get a hold of you if they want to learn more information about you?
Distenfield, Distenfield at Twitter. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook, all the socials, and Derek at gsdvs.com. Hey,
Perfect.
thanks so
And
much.
we'll put those links in our YouTube when we post this, so it'll be on there for people to tag you. But I wanted the
Love
listeners right now. Perfect, bud.
All
Talk to you soon. Be good, my
All
friend.
right, take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye. So, man, we're going around the world today. But the common denominator for today's show is our friends in China. Can't resist to bring them up. So that brings me to our final guest of the day. One I've been actually excited since last week, since he said he would come on. He dropped an amazing documentary on China. We've all been caught, I say, wearing our tinfoil hat moments with what is the truth coming out of China. Josh has an amazing documentary. I'll drop it in when we put it into post-production. You'll see it. Somebody could probably drop it in the feed that's out there. I've shared it a number of times. Just an amazing documentary on what's really going on behind the curtain. And because anybody who believes what China's saying with their low body count of 3,500, I'm like, that doesn't add up. So bringing Josh Philipp on from our friends at Epoch Times, my favorite outlet. So let's welcome Josh to the show. Josh.
Hey, how you doing, Eric? Good to see you.
It's good to see you. It's been a while. I wish we were face to face in New York. It would be much better to go grab a coffee afterwards.
Hopefully soon. Yeah, hopefully soon.
We'll save it up. But the good part is I only have to wear a suit from the top up, and I can rock shorts below. So
hey,
it's a little different than the last time I saw you. So, 1.5 million views on your documentary.
Yeah, just on the Crossroads channel, I think total we had over 10 million.
10 million. I was going off of YouTube. I was just being the YouTuber. I was doing the 10 million. So let's talk about it. China, right? We're talking about our friends in China. Obviously, you work as the senior investigative reporter at Epoch Times, do an amazing job keeping our friends in China honest. Which is a very difficult task to do because they don't make your guys' life very easy. And they've got some friends here in America that obviously don't like you guys exposing it. I do want to say, Bud, your video is now being spun by other outlets on the conservative side where they're all acting like this is brand new this week. And I'm like,
yeah, I saw Fox had the exclusive. Yeah.
The exclusive. I defended your honor last night on where was I at? It was on Twitter. It was a former reporter. I was like, what are you trying to say? This wasn't broke today. He's like, I broke this the other day. I'm like, you watched the video. I'm like, your exact words are what Josh wrote. Don't.
Oh, it's funny.
The
thing is, I don't even care, man. Truth gets out there, I'm good. Whatever.
You're doing your job. So kind of tell the folks on what you found, right? Briefly, we're going to force them to go watch it. It's going to be attached to this, but tell folks basically what your investigation, we're hearing today. So this is current news. Today's news basically told us it's probably not some weirdo eating a bat. It's more the 2 level 5, like Oz said. Oz Sultan was on earlier and said those are level 5 laboratories that are in Wuhan.
Yeah,
that really developed.
So the documentary started off with just kind of a simple concept, which is, the fact that every single one of us, myself included, have probably heard every single rumor under the sun. It's like we're locked in our homes, we're on the internet, we're seeing, contradicting stories. Sometimes the same news outlets are telling us, one thing one day and something else the next day. Nobody can make sense of what's happening. And so we wanted to do something that just looks at the whole picture, the whole, all the data we can get, looks at what we can verify, looks at what we can disprove, and just put the whole thing together, show a complete story. And so we, of course, look into just about, all the major claims, looking into where the virus came from specifically. So we look into this whole Chinese, seafood market, the Huanan seafood market, this wet market we all hear about. And we pretty thoroughly debunk that whole narrative. And notably, that wasn't hard to do. Even the Chinese Communist Party doesn't use that narrative anymore. Now they're saying it's an American bioweapon that was brought to China. That's their narrative. Now they call it the USA virus. Then we look into this laboratory, this P4 lab, as you mentioned, under the Chinese Academy of Sciences. We look into the whole history of research they were doing there. Personally, I mean, of course, here's the thing. In that documentary, we don't draw hard conclusions. We show different tracks of evidence and different tracks of, the different narratives we've heard. We talk about the marketplace. We talk about the laboratory. We talk about the kind of research they were doing there. We talk about the leaks that came out of that laboratory, the fact that there were at least 2 whistleblowers who came out, used their real names, and tried telling the world the virus came from our laboratory. We look into this woman, this young intern who worked at that lab, which is the story now coming out, which everyone's saying is the case, that this young woman was working at this laboratory, got infected, passed the virus to her boyfriend, that there was a safety slip up at that lab that allowed it to escape. I'll be honest, in my personal analysis, I do think that might be the real story. But we also look at other things. We look into China's biowarfare programs. We look into, what their motivations could have been had it been intentional. We look at who owns the lab, whose finances run the whole thing, and we tie it to a rival faction, to Xi Jinping's faction under Jiang Zemin 2 leaders ago, who's a pretty bad character himself. And so who knows? Again, we don't draw hard conclusions in the documentary, but I think we, tried to do a good service to people by just really showing what we can prove with all these different data points.
So, Josh, I think what you're providing is some great insight that we actually aren't getting from our own media, right? Like the investigation is like, we'll just throw darts, basically, is how I feel when it comes to data out of China. And obviously, I have a military background, so I have some common sense about the way that the Chinese work. And we know never been very good at telling the truth, but we've seen that communist as a party wide. I remember in '86 when Chernobyl happened, they were like, it's fine. We just, it was a power outage.
Guys
we're
glowing
in the dark, but we're cool. It's this thing about China. So, where do we go from here? Honestly, it feels like probably twofold. One, if it was an accident, well, do you think China will ever own up to it? Or two, if this was a worst case scenario and this was a deliberate attack, I think it's funny they call it the USA virus, and okay, our president calls it the Chinese virus. He's the only person who does that. Everybody else is like, I call it COVID-19 or Corona. I think that's because we drink those. It's easier to say it. But what do you think? Which way do you? How do we go up from here? Obviously, I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, it's horrible. How do we go up from this? How do we get to the truth?
Well, it does seem now that the Chinese Communist Party is starting to come clean, at least to an extent. In fact, this seems to have happened almost overnight. And not trying to claim credit for it, but a lot of it did happen after we released this documentary. Who knows? Maybe we did have some part in forcing the hand of the Chinese Communist Party, because we show some pretty serious evidence. We go over all the data. We show that it is plausible it was a bioweapon. We show that it is plausible it was a lab leak. We show that the type of research they were doing at that laboratory could have easily led to something like this happening. And some of the research they were doing, the viruses that they did create, like chimeric viruses specifically, where they were merging SARS with these bat coronaviruses, it could have happened. Lab leaks happen. In fact, there were, of course, Washington Post had a story just recently saying there were State Department cables warning of safety issues at that laboratory, back in 2018. It's coming out now that there's, people, Fox News right had the exclusive interviewing these, unnamed sources talking about how that's the case, that it came from that laboratory. It does seem, now Trump had a press conference yesterday. He was asked by a Fox reporter whether he would comment on it and talk about any conversations he had with Xi. Trump said he would not. Trump said he did talk to Xi about it. He said he would not at this time talk about the laboratory. He did say laboratory. He didn't confirm whether that was the case or not, but again, who knows? And again, I don't think the Chinese Communist Party can get away from it at this point. Now, a couple interesting points. When the news in China leaked about this, alleged case that this young intern was the patient zero, the true patient zero, and had been infected at the laboratory, right around that time, Xi Jinping actually came out publicly and in his public statement, his speech about the virus, said that biolab safety needs to become a national security priority. The two incidents lined up right on top of each other.
This is just, talking to you, we could talk forever over this topic, because it blows me away just how you peel this onion back and it just is more and more and more. Because I'm sitting here remembering, this sounds funny, traveling my last time to New York was right before all the quarantine happened. It was business as usual. And, it was my brother, I'm walking through Soho, and he's like, the part that hurts is Chinatown's really taking this on the chin because I was at the time when China had shut down their factories. And it's incredible because what it showed is how dependent our country was on China, which blew me away, with the pharmaceutical side of the house being, 98% of our pharmaceutical drugs are made there and shipped to us. But it's also caused some paranoia. So I figured, as the last question, I see it and I kind of laugh at people that are like, oh my goodness, anything from China. They're treating basically some paranoia that like the Chinese are out to get us. And I don't think that's not my belief. I don't think their citizens are out to get us, which I hate seeing these hate crimes that take place where people are attacking people of Asian descent. I mean, the same thing happened after 9/11 with the redneck crowd going and grabbing anybody who was brown skinned and going nuts and just being like, you don't belong here. And we're like, we're Americans, so we act accordingly here. But do you feel that like we're going to have to go through that time again where there's going to be this hate groups walking around and we need to blame it on a country, when I don't think it's blamed on a race, a culture, or religion did this? I mean, do you feel that we can move up from this, or are we going to have to deal with the same blowback we did in 9/11?
I don't think it's going to be anywhere near what we had in 9/11. A few different points on this. There are concerns about Chinese products being infected with the virus. In fact, Japan just came out and warned about that, saying that they're worried that China is exporting the virus through its own goods because the virus could be on surfaces of materials. When it comes to the whole race issue, let's be clear, the Chinese Communist Party is the biggest abuser of the Chinese people. The Chinese people are the biggest victims of the Communist Party. And it's why at Epoch Times we call it the CCP virus, not the China virus, not the Wuhan coronavirus, the CCP virus. Because the Chinese Communist Party and its abusive history has killed 50 million, 70 million people just under Mao. Even as we speak right now, persecuting 70 million to 100 million people who practice Falun Gong, persecuting Tibetans, Muslim Uyghurs, slave camps, you name it. And the Chinese people are victims of this just like we all are.
So let me ask you, I actually now have a follow-up question. It's your fault. You answered that so well. So whatever happened to all the protesters in Hong Kong? I mean, all of a sudden that just stopped being a news story.
Well, it stopped being a news story because the news stopped covering it.
Well, you guys covered it very well. I mean, you guys got firebombed. You did something right. You got firebombed. You're doing something good. I always say if you have haters or people try to firebomb you, you're doing something well.
Yeah, it's like the Chinese Pulitzer. You get firebombed,
That's true. So, but they just got in as human rights into the UN. I was shocked on that. I don't know who was responsible for that vote, but somebody didn't do the math because. I mean, I'm sure you guys have your whole opinion on how they got into. I'm blown away. They're now on a board talking about people's human rights. That's like putting Harvey Weinstein on a board to talk about, date rape. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, not to mention the fact, actually, at Epoch Times, we had an investigative story on it not too long ago. There were cases at the United Nations where they were going to have Chinese dissidents come and testify about abuses they were facing under the Chinese Communist Party. And the United Nations took the names of those individuals and provided them to the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party arrested them. One of them died in custody and even threatened many of their families. And then after that, the United Nations does? They go and find the whistleblower at the UN and punish her. And so, I mean, it's sickening what these international organizations do, the way they tolerate these types of abuses when, in their creed, they're supposed to be doing the opposite. I really hope this is going to get cleaned out. I think what we're seeing now with the WHO is really making a lot of countries take a harder look at it.
Wow, you know how to unload on a good question, my friend. Wow, I love it. But that is our time, my friend. We'll have to have you back on for an update. Tell the viewers how to get a hold of you if they want to tweet at you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter, Josh J. Philipp, Philipp. Also check out my YouTube channel. It's Crossroads with Joshua Philipp, or type in Crossroads Epoch Times.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Josh, for coming on. Epoch Time is one of the best journalist outlets out there. You guys write some amazing pieces. I know I find myself on that more than I find myself on other people's outlets, because you guys truly do break the news, even though our friends at Fox are those those unknown sources. I'm
Yeah,
like,
you're
me,
gonna
Josh's
get me
YouTube channel. You're doing a good job.
again. You're gonna get us firebombed again talking like that.
Yeah, they'll be nice to me. They don't
Yeah,
come after Marines. I have a lot of fire. We'll protect you. We'll put you in the family. You'll be good. But no, Josh, I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you and your entire team there at Epoch Times. You guys are amazing. So keep it up. Keep sharing the truth to everybody, and we'll have you on real soon, bud. Stay safe.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
So that is our show. Amazing. I'm so happy with the folks we interviewed today. They did an amazing job. Tomorrow show, Friday, fun Friday. We are having national radio host Roy Souter on the show. Our tech insider, Sarah Evans, will be here. You've seen her on the floor at NES. She's with SAP. This gal has been everywhere. She's going to be on to tell us about the latest and greatest going on in tech and what folks are doing for work from home. You can learn a little tips and tricks there. We have my good buddy, Matt Kuchera, coming on. He is the voice and host. Obviously, he's the voice and the host of Vet Pivot. So he's going to give us some insight on what's going on in the veteran community today, every day. And then wrap it up with the CEO of Life Flip Media, Lucy Mitchell. It's not a coincidence. That's my wife, but she's going to be talking about women's health and fitness, because starting next Friday, we are coining Friday is our Founders Friday. So we're going to put all these amazing women in business, brands, whatever they're doing, they're going to come on the show and have them every Friday. We'll be a little bit more relaxed. So that'll be our Friday. So we're going to have those guests on next week. We have a great list. Remember, next Thursday is Veterans and First Responder Day. Every Thursday on To The Point, we will be interviewing amazing. So if you know a veteran brand that needs to be recognized or come on the show, we're going to give them that airtime. So please send them away. And first responders. Don't forget my first responders. So already next Thursday is amazing. We've got an amazing firefighter and then 3 amazing veterans to go with them. I'm telling you, you don't want to miss that. You can miss every other one. Don't miss Thursday. So enjoy your weekend. I know every day feels like a long Sunday afternoon, but enjoy your weekend. And thank you for tuning in. It means a lot. Big shout out to those who support us across the board. While you guys are watching, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I'm very grateful for my team. So I thank you guys very much. I'm Eric Mitchell. So be safe, be strong, be smart, and God bless America.